Texas doesn't do anything small, and that includes failure. Some of the most ambitious, beloved, and genuinely bizarre attractions in American history once called this state home. Then, they didn't. These are the 7 attractions in Texas that lost all their visitors. Number 7. Busch Gardens, Houston. Houston. Most people know Busch Gardens as the brewery-backed theme park empire that still operates in Tampa and Williamsburg. What a lot of people don't know is that Anheuser-Busch once tried to plant a version of that concept right outside Houston, Texas, and it lasted about as long as warm beer at a summer cookout. Busch Gardens Houston opened in May 1971, built on 40 acres adjacent to the Anheuser-Busch Brewery on the northwest side of the city. The theme was Asian in inspiration, which was an unusual choice for a Houston audience in 1971. But Anheuser-Busch wasn't exactly playing it safe. The park featured monkeys, elephants, and Bengal tigers. It had a temperature-controlled ice cave housing penguins, polar bears, and lions. There was a narrow-gauge railway running through the property. For a brief moment in the early 1970s, you could ride a train past exotic animals in a climatically controlled enclosure in the middle of Texas. That's either impressive or absurd, and it might be both. The problem was attendance. When the park opened, officials expected 800,000 visitors in the first year. That number never materialized. A spokesman for Anheuser-Busch later acknowledged to the Houston Chronicle that actual attendance fell far short of projections. The company tried for a few years to make the concept work in the Houston market, but the park closed in the mid-1970s without ever finding the audience it needed. The failure had a few contributing factors worth noting. The park opened the same year as Six Flags Astroworld was already firmly established in Houston. Competing with a well-known brand for the same leisure dollar in the same city is not a recipe for easy success, especially when your own park's concept is niche and the weather is brutal 8 months of the year. Anheuser-Busch ultimately decided the investment wasn't worth the return, and the Houston experiment was quietly retired. The company refocused its park business on the Williamsburg and Tampa locations, which have survived to the present day. The Houston Park site eventually became part of the brewery complex. Almost nothing about it remains in the public memory, which, given how exotic and strange it sounds in retrospect, is a real shame. There's also a broader lesson in the Busch Gardens Houston story about the limits of brand extensions. Anheuser-Busch had successfully built Busch Gardens in Virginia and Florida around concepts that matched their markets: European heritage themes for East Coast audiences, African safari themes for Florida tourists, an Asian-themed park with exotic animals, and an ice cave in Houston in 1971 was a concept looking for an audience that wasn't fully there. The park was genuinely unusual. It just wasn't what Houston wanted, or perhaps what Houston was ready for at that particular moment in the early 1970s, when the city's entertainment infrastructure was already anchored by one very large competitor on the south side of town. Number 6. Seven Seas Marine Life Park, Arlington. Before SeaWorld became the dominant name in marine animal entertainment, there was Seven Seas Marine Life Park in Arlington, Texas, which opened in March 1972, lasted 3 years, closed, tried to come back under a different name, and then gave up entirely within a single calendar year. That's a special kind of failure. Seven Seas opened on March 18, 1972, with a $9 million investment behind it, a substantial figure for a regional attraction in the early 1970s. It was situated near Six Flags Over Texas in the Arlington Entertainment Corridor, which made geographic sense on paper. You put your marine life park next to the state's most popular theme park and benefit from the established draw of families already heading to that part of the Metroplex. The park featured a killer whale, sea lion circus, dolphin shows, elephant seals, and penguins. For Arlington in 1972, that was a genuinely novel offering. Nothing like it existed within hundreds of miles. The location should have been an advantage. Being next to Six Flags meant the area was already established as a tourist destination, and families driving from Dallas or Fort Worth already had a reason to be nearby. Whether you tacked on Seven Seas as a second-day trip or a separate visit depended entirely on whether Seven Seas could make its own case. It struggled to do that. It didn't work. The park lost money consistently through 1975 and closed. The operators tried a second chance in 1976, reopening under the rebranded name Hawaiian Kai with a new theme. That version lasted exactly one season before closing permanently. The math behind the failure was fairly simple. Marine animal parks require significant capital to operate. The animals need substantial care and infrastructure, and the ticket revenue at Seven Seas never came close to covering those costs. The concept of a dedicated marine life park struggled to compete with the established names. Six Flags was right next door, and the traveling distance from Dallas-Fort Worth already demanded a significant commitment from families who had to choose how to spend a day off. As one Arlington resident recalled years later, "We went once, right after it opened. It was actually pretty good, but Six Flags was always going to win that argument for most people." SeaWorld, operating on a much larger scale and with national brand recognition, would eventually open its own San Antonio location in Texas in 1988. But Seven Seas, the smaller, earlier attempt to bring the same concept to the Dallas-Fort Worth market, was gone 12 years before SeaWorld arrived. A cautionary tale about timing, scale, and the difficulty of competing in a market someone else already owns. There is a harder geographic truth buried in the Seven Seas story as well. The Arlington Entertainment Corridor that Seven Seas chose for its location is one of the most competitive stretches of real estate for family entertainment in the country. Six Flags Over Texas had been there since 1961. The Texas Rangers baseball stadium would come later. AT&T Stadium, home of the Dallas Cowboys, sits just down the road. The entertainment corridor between Dallas and Fort Worth is not a place where a small marine life park with a killer whale and some penguins was ever going to hold its own for long. The location that seemed like an advantage, near Six Flags, easy to reach from the Metroplex, was also a neighborhood where every family's vacation dollar faced fierce competition from every direction. Number 5. Magic Landing, El Paso. El Paso is in the far west corner of Texas, separated from the rest of the state by hundreds of miles of desert, closer to Tucson and Albuquerque than to Houston or Dallas. Building a major theme park there in the 1980s was either a bold bet on an underserved market or a spectacular miscalculation, depending on which year you're asking about. Magic Landing opened on July 4, 1984, with a reported construction budget of $10 million. The opening day drew a crowd of about 30,000 people, impressive enough to suggest real demand in a city that didn't have much else in the way of major attractions. The park included the Old Galveston Railway, a narrow-gauge railroad running through the grounds aboard a replica 1850s locomotive capable of carrying 200 passengers. It had roller coasters, flat rides, and the kind of genuine theme park energy that El Paso had never seen before. The promise didn't hold. Within the first year, a tragedy occurred when a young man was injured on a roller coaster and later died. The incident generated legal action, a lawsuit that was eventually settled, and the nickname Tragic Landing, which is exactly the kind of thing you don't want attached to your amusement park's identity. The liability created severe insurance problems. Texas required the park to carry a $1 million insurance policy, and by 1988, Magic Landing could no longer obtain coverage at a price it could afford. The park closed mid-season in 1988, 4 years after it opened. Attempts were made over the following 5 years to reopen under various arrangements, but none succeeded. The rides were gradually removed or sold off in the early 1990s. The building stood in the El Paso desert for 2 more decades, empty, increasingly vandalized, periodically set on fire by people who apparently found the ruins too tempting to leave alone. In 2009, the county had what remained demolished after the ongoing vandalism, and arson made the site too much of a liability to leave standing. There is something particularly bleak about the Magic Landing story. The park was not poorly conceived for its market. El Paso genuinely lacked large-scale family entertainment, and the opening day crowds confirmed the demand. It wasn't a victim of superior competition the way Seven Seas was in Arlington. It was brought down by a single accident, a liability crisis it couldn't resolve, and the slow decay of an abandoned property in a desert city where the sun bleaches everything and nobody was watching. By the time the county knocked the last walls down in 2009, 21 years had passed since the gates closed. El Paso's theme park dream lasted 4 seasons and then spent 2 more decades falling apart in the sun. Number 4. Aquarena Springs, San Marcos. This one is different from every other entry on this list because Aquarena Springs wasn't just a theme park. It was genuinely one of the most unusual tourist attractions that has ever existed in the United States. And for decades, it was one of the most popular destinations in all of Texas. Aquarena Springs operated at Spring Lake in San Marcos from 1951 to 1996. The park was built around a cluster of approximately 200 natural springs, feeding one of the largest aquifer-fed lake ecosystems in the world. The springs had been attracting humans for millennia. Clovis artifacts found on the site date back roughly 12,000 years. Tonkawa Indians knew the springs as Canocanaisatetlo, meaning warm water. In more recent centuries, Spanish explorers documented them, and Franciscan missionaries camped nearby. The resort history at the site dates to 1929, when A.B. Rogers' son Paul developed the property by building the Spring Lake Hotel and introducing glass-bottom boat rides on the remarkably clear spring-fed lake. The hotel didn't survive the Great Depression, but the glass-bottom boats proved durable. The concept of floating out over springs so clear you could see the bottom had an appeal that didn't require any additional marketing. People simply loved it, and they came back. When the park formally opened in 1951, it built around a submarine theater, an underwater viewing room, where visitors could watch performances taking place in the crystal-clear lake without getting wet. The water visibility in the spring-fed lake was exceptional. Guests in the submarine theater could see performers 60 feet away with extraordinary clarity. That level of natural water clarity is not something you can manufacture or replicate. It was a geological gift that the park turned into a genuine spectacle. And what performances they were! The park's aquamaids were synchronized swimming performers who executed elaborate underwater routines visible through the submarine theater's viewing windows. The shows featured a character named Glurpo, the underwater clown. There was a Franciscan mission replica, a sky ride, and a tic-tac-toe game in which visitors could compete against a live chicken. And then there was Ralph the famous swimming pig, who performed a swine dive from a platform into the lake and became arguably the most famous pig in Texas history. Life magazine ran a feature about an underwater wedding held at the park in 1954. Popular Mechanics covered the submarine theater in 1952. In 1967, CBS journalist Charles Kuralt included Ralph in his nationally broadcast On the Road program. In its heyday in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, Aquarena Springs was one of the most popular tourist destinations in the state of Texas. Recalled one longtime San Marcos photographer, people came from all over the world. At its peak, the park drew 250,000 visitors annually and was widely considered the top commercial tourist draw in Texas during the 1950s and 1960s. Then, in 1994, Southwest Texas State University purchased the 90-acre property for $7 million. The school ran the park for 1 year before the Board of Regents shut it down due to significant financial losses. The remaining attractions were gradually removed: the underwater theater, the sky ride, the fiberglass volcano that served as a performer's dressing room, the tic-tac-toe chicken enclosure. The full dismantling was completed in 2012 when the last structures came down. The transformation from beloved roadside wonder to educational facility is one of the more poignant endings in this list. The university's rationale was scientifically reasonable. Spring Lake and its spring system is ecologically significant, and the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment that now occupies the site does important work. But the transition from a place where 250,000 people a year watched a pig dive into a crystal-clear lake and mermaids drank fruit punch underwater to a water research institution is quite a journey. The property is now the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, an educational facility focused on the spring's ecological significance. The glass-bottom boat rides still operate, which is at least something. The aquamaids are gone. Ralph is long gone. And the Mermaid Society of Texas, founded in 2016, holds an annual promenade in memory of the performers who once made this the most remarkable roadside attraction in the state. It's worth pausing on what made Aquarena Springs so unusual. The submarine theater concept, where visitors sat in a dry room beneath the lake's surface and watched performers through a large window, was not duplicated anywhere else in the country at scale. It appeared in Popular Mechanics in 1952 because it was genuinely novel. Ralph the Swimming Pig was nationally famous. The whole thing operated for 4 decades on the premise that the natural springs were extraordinary enough to anchor a world unto themselves. And they were. The place was singular. There will not be another one. Number 3, Boardwalk Fun Park, Grand Prairie. The story of Boardwalk Fun Park in Grand Prairie is one of the quicker rises and falls on this list. A park that went through multiple identity changes, survived several ownership transitions, and then ended with a single roller coaster accident that closed the gates for good. The site opened in 1982 as White Water, a water park in the Grand Prairie Entertainment District. In 1985, it was purchased by Wet 'n Wild, a national water park brand with deeper pockets. That ownership lasted only until new buyers came in around 1991 and redeveloped the site as Boardwalk Fun Park in 1992, a more traditional amusement park format with a boardwalk theme replacing the water park focus. The new version of the park barely had time to establish itself before disaster struck. An accident on the park's Pipeline Express roller coaster resulted in the serious injury of a 12-year-old rider. The accident made local news and spooked the park's insurance situation. Reports at the time indicated the park intended to reopen for the 1993 season, but it never did. The gates stayed shut after the 1992 closure. The land sat vacant for a few years after that. In 1996, the Automotive Investment Group purchased the property, and by 1999, a Grand Prairie Ford dealership was operating on the site. So what was once a water park, then a Wet 'n Wild, then a boardwalk-themed amusement park, is now a car lot, which is Texas in a nutshell. The Boardwalk Fun Park story is instructive because it shows how quickly a single safety incident can end an attraction that was otherwise operational. The park wasn't failing financially in any dramatic way when the accident occurred. It was trying to build a new identity and a new audience. One bad day on one ride was enough to make that impossible. And there's also something worth noting about the identity problem Boardwalk Fun Park faced from the beginning. The site had been Whitewater, then Wet 'n Wild, then Boardwalk Fun Park. 3 different names, 3 different concepts, all in roughly a decade. The park never had enough time in any single identity to build the kind of loyal local following that keeps a regional attraction viable. Joyland in Lubbock lasted 50 years partly because it was always just Joyland. The same place with the same rides and the same feeling, generation after generation. Boardwalk Fun Park was still trying to figure out what it was when the accident ended the experiment entirely. Number 2, Joyland Amusement Park, Lubbock. Joyland in Lubbock holds a special place in this list because it lasted the longest, came the closest to surviving, and ultimately ended not with a bang, but with a last-minute deal falling through. The park began in the 1940s as Mackenzie Park Playland. In 1973, Jimmy and Katie Dean took over and rebranded it as Joyland, starting with 13 rides. Over the following 5 decades, it grew to 30 rides, including 3 roller coasters, developed a devoted following across West Texas, and welcomed over 2 million guests across its lifetime. The retro 1980s theming, which the park never really updated because why mess with what worked, became part of its charm. Joyland was the kind of place that felt like it was stuck in a particular moment in time, and that was exactly what its regulars loved about it. The park sat on 16 acres inside Mackenzie Park, the same green space from which its original name came. It operated in the open West Texas sky, with a midway that had misting systems overhead to keep guests cool in temperatures that could push past 100 degrees in July and August. If you think about that, an outdoor amusement park in Lubbock, Texas, drawing crowds through midsummer, it tells you something about how much local families wanted a place like this to exist. People will show up for a park they love, even when the weather is trying to stop them. The park had a genuine commitment to preserving old rides that other parks had discarded. The Music Express and Sky Glider Sky Ride had been saved from Pontchartrain Beach Amusement Park in Louisiana. The Galaxy Coaster came from White Swan Park in Pennsylvania, where it had operated since 1955. The Allen Herschel Company train had its own history before landing in Lubbock. Joyland was essentially a living museum of American amusement park culture, gathered together in West Texas. By the early 2020s, the park was struggling. Flooding damage, aging infrastructure, and persistent staffing challenges were taking their toll. On September 12, 2022, the Dean family announced that Joyland would not reopen after that season unless a buyer could be found. In October 2022, it looked like a miracle had happened. A group of local investors announced they would purchase the park and reopen it for the 2023 season. Lubbock celebrated. Then on January 10, 2023, those investors backed out. The deal was dead. The park would not reopen. Liquidation began. Beginning of January of 2023, we all got on the phone and they said, "Hey, we're going to sell everything," said Samuel Shergott, president of International Rides Management, the firm brought in to handle the disposal of the rides. His firm spent all of 2023 tracking down new homes for Joyland's 30-some rides, contacting family-owned parks across the country one by one, trying to place each machine with someone who would appreciate it. The rides are scattered now, living in other parks around the country. The Lubbock site is empty. Joyland, which had survived 5 decades of West Texas summers and economic ups and downs, was undone in the end by a deal that fell through at the last moment. What makes Joyland's closure particularly felt in Lubbock is that it wasn't replaced. There is no other large-scale family amusement park in the city. There isn't one within comfortable driving distance. The Dean family had kept the park running for 50 years, through periods when a less committed operator would have sold out long before. The retro theming, the preserved vintage rides, the misting system on the midway to keep guests cool in the West Texas heat, all of it reflected a philosophy that prioritized the guest's experience over the bottom line for a long time. When the option to sell finally arrived and the deal collapsed at the last moment, the park that had been a fixture of Lubbock family life for 2 generations was simply gone. Number 1, Six Flags Astroworld, Houston. If you grew up in Houston or anywhere within 3 hours of Houston, Astroworld is probably already running through your memory right now. The Texas Cyclone, Greased Lightning, Thunder River, the Batman ride. For a generation of Texans, Astroworld wasn't just an amusement park. It was a rite of passage, a summer ritual, the place you went for birthdays and school trips and first dates. Astroworld was created by Roy Hofheinz, former Houston mayor, original owner of the Houston Astros, the man who had already built the Astrodome, and was apparently not interested in slowing down. Hofheinz purchased 116 acres south of the Astrodome and hired Randall Duell and Associates, the same firm that had designed Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, to lay out the park. Astroworld opened on June 1, 1968. Admission was $3.50 for children and $4.50 for adults. Within a few years, it was a genuine cultural institution for the entire Houston region. The park was built with a space-age sensibility that fit perfectly with Houston's identity as NASA's city. The name itself was a deliberate echo of the Astrodome. It was part of Hofheinz's Astrodomain vision, which also included the Astro Hall Convention Center. The whole concept was Houston at its most ambitious. The world's first air-conditioned domed stadium, a world-class amusement park next door, a convention center, and the Houston Astros baseball team all operating as a unified entertainment empire. It was the kind of thinking that only really happens in Texas. Six Flags acquired the park in 1975 and added it to their national chain. Through the late 1970s and 1980s, new rides arrived regularly. The park grew to 9 roller coasters. An adjacent water park, Waterworld, was eventually absorbed into the operation in 2002. Astroworld was, for a long time, the definition of a thriving regional theme park. Then the cracks started showing. Attendance declined through the late 1990s and early 2000s, a pattern Six Flags was seeing across multiple parks as competition for entertainment dollars intensified. The September 11th attacks in 2001 hit the travel and tourism sector broadly, and Astroworld took a hit along with everyone else. The park also developed a reputation in certain quarters for increasing disorder and rude visitors, which Six Flags cited in its closure announcement. The park's location created ongoing logistical problems. The nearby Reliant Stadium, home of the Houston Texans football team, needed parking, and conflicts over the shared lots between the stadium, the park, and the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo grew increasingly contentious. Six Flags, facing significant financial pressure across its entire operation, looked at Astroworld and saw valuable real estate more than a performing asset. On September 12, 2005, CEO Kieran Burke announced that Astroworld would close at the end of the season. Six Flags expected to sell the land for upwards of $150 million. The final day was October 30th, 2005, the last night of Fright Fest. People who were there that night described the mood as a genuine community mourning. Demolition began the very next morning. Six Flags spent $20 million tearing down what it had operated for 37 years. Most of the roller coasters were demolished on site. A handful of rides were relocated to other Six Flags parks. The Texas Cyclone, the park's iconic wooden coaster that had thrilled Houstonians since 1976, was demolished where it stood. And then the real estate deal that had justified the whole exercise fell apart. Instead of the expected $150 million, the company received $77 million for the land, less than half of projections. The failure of the land sale was cited as a contributing factor in CEO Kieran Burke's subsequent removal from the position. Six Flags had spent $20 million tearing down a beloved park, then sold the land at a significant loss. The one-foot-bridge still standing over Loop 610 is the only physical evidence that any of it ever happened. The land where 9 roller coasters once stood is now a parking lot used for overflow during the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, a seasonal gathering that operates for a few weeks a year. What was once a destination that drew Texans from hundreds of miles away is now a place people park their trucks for a few weeks each spring and then leave. It was akin to losing a local sports team, wrote one theme park historian about the closure. And for Houstonians who grew up with Astroworld as an anchor of their summers, that comparison is not an exaggeration. The greater Houston area is now nearly 3 hours from the nearest Six Flags. What was once a drive across town became, overnight, a significant road trip. Astroworld's ghost is still loud in Houston's cultural memory. It shows up every time someone paints a mural, names a playlist, or posts a grainy photograph of the Texas Cyclone on social media. The park has been gone for 20 years, and people are still not over it. If you grew up going to any of these places, or if this reminded you of one you didn't know about, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten, the closed, and the remembered corners of American history. New videos every week.